Wednesday, everyone watching around the world, and I'm really pleased today, this final live of the year, to introduce Toby Hough, former colleague of mine from HiBob. Toby, really glad to have you here.
Hi, Alex. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to join you with this conversation and great to see you.
You're welcome. Great to see you again. It has been a while, and I know we've been in touch. But for those of you who haven't met you before, who don't know you, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself and say a little bit about you and what you do.
Yes, be delighted to. So yeah, as Alex mentioned, my name's Toby. I'm the People and Culture Director for HiBob for our Europe region. So I have been in the HR space now for HiBob for just over 2 years. Prior to that, I worked at a seed round startup for about 3.5 years, building the HR function from scratch with a founding team. And then before that was in more sort of typical scale-up tech companies. And way back, started out in Deloitte Consulting before I moved into HR. But I've always had a real interest in the HR side of things. And one of those things that really attracts me and still does is the need to change gear in your day-to-day work, the variety of work that it presents. You might go from some quite operational or sort of data-driven work in one moment and then to a very human conversation in the next. And I like the way that challenges me. And very often it's that human element that inspires me the most. And actually, one thing I'll say, HiBob is itself as an HR product. So working in HR for an HR business brings its challenges. Our team is very informed, so we don't have a struggle to get a seat at the table or be involved in decision making. It's sometimes the opposite challenge, which is a lovely problem to have, and I won't complain about that again. Where we're very brought into the business. The team is, really knows what they're doing. And they also want to know how we use HiBob as a product. And one of my answers to that question, it often I think disappoints, because the team is hoping that we'll say it's all to do with the analytics and the excellence at scale and the amazing kind of integrations. But really for me, it's the individual employee pages that I find the most valuable, because we look after a region. In my region, we look after a region of people spread over 4 different countries, about 275 people. I can't know them all as much as I would like. But when we are having conversations about any one of those as an individual, or if one of them reaches out to me, I can go straight to their employee page and I can get a little bit remind myself all about them, and we're not going into that conversation cold. So there's a little bit about my journey, Alex, and a bit about what I enjoy on the HR side, including these very important one-to-one human interactions.
Yeah, because I think that's basically it, is that the people make the company, and without people like you, then how can we integrate things in culture? And I suppose it is a really difficult job, you would have in your hands, anyone in HR. Maybe made more difficult without a product like HiBob, where you can go into those employee pages. Before we dive into the aspects of well-being, what companies can do, Toby, how do you see the role of HR yourself? Having been in it for a long time, worked at various different companies. We both have that Big Four background, but going at it from different angles. How do you see, what is the role of HR for you personally?
So first of all, it's an evolving role. That's one of the trends that I see in the industry when I speak to industry peers. Those that are, I think, driving the HR agenda are the ones that don't see their role in too rigid a light. Mm-hmm. I think it was easier to answer that question in the past, and of course there is a set of scope which still very much falls into that role, around everything to do with managing the employee life cycle from the moment someone expresses an interest in your business to the moment that they've left and beyond. From an operational, from an administrative point of view. And then there was this move into strategic business partnering and what that means. So then there's this idea of the kind of one-to-many interactions, partnering with senior leaders to have them think about the human element in the decisions that they make that might affect multiple people. There's the element around workplace. This is quite a new one, I think. There are still businesses where workplace facilities wouldn't fall into HR. I've got quite a strong opinion on that and believe it really needs to. So that's a whole other thing. And then there's this idea of being a thought partner to people in the business. And that's an interesting challenge. It's not one that we have a monopoly on. Sometimes that thought partnership requires somebody who's more professionally trained. But what I've noticed as an emerging trend is, a sign that you are really well embedded as a trusted partner in your business, is that a seemingly small decision by somebody in the business, they might just want an ear, somebody to chew that over with. So maybe that's not even a reorg, but just a small adjustment in a team structure, or considering, somebody moving from one role to another as a team leader, and then flipping it around to the individual contributors. It can be, wanting to share or talk about their own career path, their own career developments. They want a space that isn't with their direct manager to say, I realize my long-term passions lie somewhere else. What do we think about this? And I love those conversations because it also shows there's a trust in the business at that point, that they're willing, they know that they can say to you, look, in 5 years' time, I don't see myself doing what I'm doing now. And there won't be a kind of repercussion for them in that. And then there is another component, which is being there for people when they are in need. And I feel this, again, is something I feel very passionately about, because I think HR were big proponents, celebrants of the idea that we should bring our whole selves to work. I think this phrase came out of many places, one of which was the work that Google did on high functioning teams, and seeing that they had this really strong foundational layer of trust and psychological safety. And when you double click into all of those areas, you see that trust and psychological safety is built when people feel they can really show up as who they truly are. And what I've come to realize in the last couple of years, particularly, is that you've got to realize the weight of the responsibility in encouraging people to do that. Companies want you to show up as you truly are, because that is when you are your most creative. It is when you form the best relationships. It is when you come up with the best ideas that you might otherwise have hidden because it sounds a bit wacky. But actually, it's the idea that differentiates that project. All of these things. But on the flip side, it doesn't work for that company to then turn around and say, oh, I can see you're having a bad day. Don't show up as who you are today. You can leave that now that you're struggling. Can you leave yourself at home and just get your head down? This is very hypocritical. So if we are going to say, show up as who you truly are, be your true self at work, be authentic, whatever the wording is, we have to be prepared to accept people when they are in a difficult spot as well.
Yeah, and this is something that I found challenging. I mean, there's that point you mentioned about building trust and psychological safety. This takes time. One of the things that I personally respected about HiBob was the first and only company I actually met someone in HR on day one. I remember I joined with someone else. There was an onboarding we had. There was an HR manager who was helping us with certain things. And I guess the onboarding started before I even joined, with the pre-boarding. I mean, we know about the Bob platform, but I remember meeting you. You were in on screen. It was a huge screen, actually, because you weren't in there. Yeah. But that was brilliant, because then I met someone from HR, and of course it's an HR company, you know what you're doing, but that trust, that helped build a sense of trust, which I just didn't have. A lot of the times, the only time I would interact with HR would be when something went wrong, and that was the perception I personally had of, that's where HR are there. They weren't there for me, they were there, for the company or something like that. And, working in the Big Four environment, the whole sense of, can I be my authentic self? But I was told that you have to put on a persona or a perception for the client to serve them. Because I work for PwC, you work for PwC. It was all about the brand. They want the PwC brand. You have to emanate a certain sense of professionalism, whatever that means. I never felt that. I could just be my true self, and it's one of the values, I believe. I forgot the wording of it. Perhaps you can enlighten us.
Yeah, the value we have is bring me, win as we.
Bring me,
win as we. This idea that actually there's a tight relationship between those two concepts. If you are comfortable to bring yourself, that's where you build the strong relationships with those around you, and the collective output is better than it would have been on your own. And I think something you said there is a really super thing to dig into for a second, Alex, which is around the idea that HR's got to decide if they are there for the business or if they're there for the individual, for the employee. And I really think that's something we can challenge now with a modern approach to HR, because it's not that simple. Like, you know, why do we want to be there for the employees? Well, you get two great outcomes from that. If you really are there for the employee, one of the outcomes you get is a happy, thriving individual who feels, or maybe we can rephrase that. Maybe we could say an individual who feels that they are safe, that they belong, because happiness doesn't have to exist every single day in order for that to be true. And then we can lean back on all that research and say, these are the individuals that we want in our organization to drive those amazing business outcomes. And that's where I would challenge that idea that you're there for one or the other. And very often when we have to have, you know, we do have to have in HR those difficult conversations where somebody might not be remaining with the business. First of all, I'm a huge believer in doing that with kindness. I think that there's a defense mechanism for some HR professionals that maybe you just got to be tough in those conversations. And I just don't buy into that. I think that those conversations are really crap. So actually what you have to do is say, this is a really crap conversation and I'm really sorry that we're having it. And actually those conversations happen for a whole variety of circumstances. But let's say it's a performance-related conversation. Very rarely is that met with complete surprise and shock. Most often there is a recognition that something hasn't quite been gelling. And so that also, I think, plays into this idea that if you can create an environment where your people are feel that they can trust their HR team, their colleagues around them, there is that psychological safety, then they will thrive. And if there's a mismatch and it isn't quite working, then sometimes the kindest thing to do is recognize that and say, you know what, I think there's an organization out there where you'll be in a better place, where there's a better fit for you. So even in the hardest moments, you try and wire it in. Maybe it sounds like I'm just really drinking the Kool-Aid, but you know, you people, especially now when people's average tenure is what, kind of 18 months, you know, and that's across the board. And surely if you double click, you'll see quite a lot of variation in that. And actually, we're a pre-IPO scale-up, and the average tenure is longer in that environment because there's an incentive why people want to stay around. But with people moving on quite quickly throughout, you know, that's the other thing. We have to remember, what are we here to do for our employees? And we're here to give them an amazing step on their journey. And that journey might be long with us, or it might just be a little stepping stone onto something else. And we need to remove the personal, like feeling personal about that, and be willing to have them again. If we're talking about showing up as you are, maybe you're somebody who doesn't like change. You want to be in one place for a long time. Maybe you're a nomad. Maybe you love the idea of moving around every year or so. And so this is where the role gets so interesting.
You were talking to me directly now, Toby. I love traveling around. You knew that work from anywhere policy. Not the first time I've been in Peru, not my first journey here, but yeah, that's what I love. And it's basically about showing up as who you are, as you love being with people who can support you. HR are part of that support. And I suppose that kind of brings me on to the next point about the ways that HR can support when there are difficult conversations. And anyone watching, feel free to comment any questions that you have for Toby, either as an HR leader himself or anything that you want to know about HR. But those difficult conversations, whether it is a performance-related one, as you said, doesn't come as a surprise, or it could be someone like myself, you know, coming to work, you know, who has had issues in the past with, you know, wellness or something like that. How I can show up and people can think, oh, you know, that's reflected in poor performance or something like that. You know, I'm not going to have it on my CV that I burned out in a big corporate job, working 18-hour days, 6 days a week away from home. Because why would I have that on the CV? But I know my limits, you know, and there is some culture out there, remnants of what I call hustle and grind, and that is kind of going away. But how can people show up effectively when they do have certain, I suppose, like predispositions, if you want to call it that? How can we help these people?
Well, to begin with, I think we must, because again, the I think at this point, it comes back again to this idea of people, if people are encouraged to show up as their true selves, then you get amazing outputs from those people, as well as maybe seeing them through some challenging times. So first of all, I would take off the table the idea of the trade-off. I think it's very hard to find talent. And if you limit yourself into a category, which probably for all the good reasons would be illegal, where you said, I want talent, but you've got to be from these narrow parameters. And if you've ever had any one of the following issues, then I can't bring you in. I don't think you'd be able to build your business. I think, I think there'd be a major issue there. The first, and I think it's critical to be able to speak from a one-to-many as best as possible initially, because if a company can project in its culture and its practices how it looks out for people and all different journeys and stages in their life, and you can speak to somebody even about a topic that you don't even know before they've joined or in their onboarding, then you're starting to create those strands of comfort. So a simple example would be maybe something around family-friendly practices. And the reason I'm giving this example is I think this is one that's got a much longer legacy than neurodivergent support or mental health support. My hope, as an aside, is that in 5 years' time, we look back on all of the progress that businesses have made around neurodiversity and mental health support. There's a lot more that can be done. In the same way that now we can look back with a bit more pride about, say, family-friendly practices. But we have started a new initiative where we do a roundtable with our parents, and we hear from them around the practices that are working for them and the ones that are not. And I was really happy to hear that our parents felt that from the beginning, they were encouraged to see that this was a place where they could be a parent. And it was through little things like public calendars that said kids time, or public calendars that said dropping off kids at school, collecting kids, whatever it might be, or, child's nativity play. I'm thinking of that because it's Christmas here in the UK. So those sort of public role modeling of those behaviors. And I think the same is true for health. So things like focus time, things like time for me, downtime. I need moments in the day when I'm not disturbed, just so I can get that mental clarity and mental calm, is a practice that we can role model. Something I've learned from speaking to the team, right? So this is a massive one, I think, is ongoing consultation and dialogue, because we still have so much more to learn in terms of how we can support employees that have got all kinds of different neurodivergencies or maybe challenges with their mental health. The way that I would think about it is, if an employee came to us and said, I really love to work for you, or maybe they don't even say this, but maybe you just notice that their arm is in a sling, they've broken their arm. You're not going to, as an employer, you might notice it, and then you're not going to even think on it much longer. And that's the space that we need to get to when it comes to neurodivergency and mental health, is we need to be totally aware that there is a lot going on out there that we might not necessarily see with physical cues, and set up the mechanisms to support it. So one might be, and we got feedback on this, we hadn't proactively explained that all of our medical and health provision at HiBob automatically applied to mental health. So that meant that our colleagues were having to say to us, I don't know if I'm allowed to self-certify this as a sick day, but I'm not very well today. You might not be able to see it or hear me sneezing or with a sore throat, but I'm not very well today. Now for me, that is completely legit. So now what we need to do is say to them when they join, this is our sick leave policy, that applies as much to physical health as it does to mental health. Mm-hmm. And why do we have to do that for mental health? Because we just have so much more to go in terms of our learning and our journey and people's ability to accept and be comfortable around it. I think it comes from a lack of understanding. We don't have to do it with our physical health because we've already been on that journey, because maybe it's more visible to see. So the first thing I would say is proactive signposting. I think any kind of program that encourages studying curiosity, I think expanding out when we talk about DE&I to include neurodiversity in the language, in the training, in the examples, are ways that you can have a one-to-many conversation right from the start. So you don't need to wait for that person to come to you and say, look, I've been here for a year, I haven't told you this, but I need to tell you something. I don't want people to ever feel like that. I want people to instead come and say, gosh, it's so interesting that you were talking about in the diversity training, neurodiversity, because I actually consider myself neurodivergent, and this is why, and this is how it is for me. Because you've already given them the platform and the company to bring it up. That's important. So the one-to-many can then lead to the one-to-one, but as an invitation.
Yeah, completely right. Because when it's one-to-one, it's all silo. That one-to-many approach makes it much more inviting. It's more encouraging. It's more transparent from the get-go when you're signposting it in the policy. That's certainly something that I think if I ever were to go back to a company, something I would really love to see. Because I have I'd say there's still maybe remnants. I know it could be fear, shame, this, that. Don't know what the emotion is, but a reluctance to be open about my own challenges with neurodivergence and the fact that maybe I would benefit from certain things that others can't. And I actually then feel like, I'm taking something away from someone else if I ask for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Alex, I think what comes to mind as well is this equity of employee experience. Mm-hmm. So we get a lot of requests in HR for flexibility in working. We don't have to agree to all of those requests, but of course we always want to understand what's driving those requests. And one thing I notice is that people, and I hope this doesn't come across poorly, but people who are maybe haven't experienced being in a minority of some sort are generally very good at asking for requests for flexibility. There's just a confidence there, it's like it's just walk in and off we go. And folks that are from maybe they are experiencing something that they feel puts them on the margins in some way or another, or in a minority within that. But it doesn't even have to be a minority outside the walls of a company. It could be a minority within that business. An obvious one is gender, is race, is sexuality, like any of those things. Those are the people that tend to be more frightened about putting those requests forward for flexibility, when actually they probably be the best beneficiaries of those requests for flexibility. And in my view, really the rightful beneficiaries of those requests for flexibility. So, if somebody comes to me, we have a hybrid policy. We expect people to be in the office 2 days a week. And there's lots of reasons why. We've researched that as a business. It's important for us. It's not so much top down, as much as it is having spoken through a survey to all of our colleagues around what they want from their office and environment. But if somebody comes to me and says, look, actually, you can't see this, but for me, the office environment is really a challenge for the following reasons, that's a really easy request to grant. It's really easy to be able to say to them, you know what, I want the office space to be a place that excites you. And if that means that you can't be in every two, you might wake up some mornings and feel it's going to be a very difficult place for you, then let's take that off the table as something to worry about. That's what requests for flexibility should be about, not necessarily, when it's raining, I don't want to come in. And I've had requests like that.
Oh, wow. Have you ever told them to bring an umbrella or advise them on a rain jacket?
Well, then we just changed our winter swag and we gave everybody an umbrella. So we said, don't worry, here's the solution.
Yeah, but there's a couple of points you touched on there, like enabling people, empowering them, and of course inclusivity, which I guess has become a bit of a buzzword. Everyone wants to be inclusive, almost feels they have to be inclusive. There's a difference between that, the wanting this, and actually being inclusive. And very small examples, just allowing people to make the requests, the signposting, something that I felt comfortable doing during my time at HiBob. I don't remember when exactly, but I decided I want to lose weight and sleep better. So I thought I'd cut out alcohol. Didn't have a problem with it. I just wanted to lose weight and sleep better. And I remember, we had the Thursday happy hour and stuff like that. And I went up to the office manager and was like, can we have more 0.0% beers? Something simple like that. I suppose, does that put me in a minority? I don't know how many would drink alcohol or not, but it's something simple like that. Being able to ask and having that courage to do it. So that's a bit different than being a parent or someone who is challenged with any sort of mental or physical disability. And it's those things that we can't see, how we can enable people to really, and I don't know if this is the right way to put it. Maybe you can find better language, I don't think it's saying standing up for themselves, but I guess speaking to their own needs, and I guess
that's nicely put. I think speaking to, what do you need in order to thrive? What can we do to help you maximize your experience and maximize your impact. So that is an interesting one, in terms of those are the questions that matter to us. And sometimes it can be challenging. Not every single one of those requests is simple. Sometimes as a business, you then need to think through if you can or you can't. But the important thing is then having the conversation and the dialogue around it. The requests come in, thinking it through. If we can't honor that request, why not? Explaining it to the individual in a way that is respectful, and that shows that their case has been listened to. And that's another thing I think I've definitely learned through working internationally. There's going to be an element of different cultures' expectations around this, is that people are a lot more accepting of an outcome that they might not necessarily have chosen if they feel they have been consulted on that outcome and their preferred outcome has been considered. And if it's being considered and there's been a discussion, then they're more willing to accept that. And again, I think that's true for requests, because that's often the fear that I see from some more cautious HR professionals around opening the door to requests for flexibility is, but what if we can't honor the request? We're just going to get, be put down as this group that's saying no all the time. I would say be bold. I would say you're probably more flexible than you realize already. And actually set the expectation from the front that it's a demand. It's not a demand. It's a conversation, and encourage the conversation. The final thing I would say is that sometimes you might hear data points from a few different places before you realize it's really worth investing in that thing. So an example at HiBob would be our balance weekends, where this is something which is really in the wellbeing space. It's designed to give everybody a little bit of silence from time to time. We are a global business. We span the west coast of the US to Australia. We have team members that work a Sunday to Thursday working week, and team members that work a Monday to Friday working week, and then all the different time zones in between. So I'm not good at maths, but somewhere in amongst there's 30 seconds where someone isn't working. And we realized that was wearing people down. It was having an impact. And we started to notice it. And you don't always need to act right away, right? You can say, okay, that's interesting, I'm going to clock that. And then you notice again that it's coming up, and a third time, and a fourth time. And at that point, you can say, we have the data for this now. We're seeing that this is something that our employees really want. And that's the other real value in having a conversation around flexibility. You don't have to commit to doing it right away. And sometimes it might not be the right thing because it could be very relevant to that one individual and not relevant to the others. And then, you decide if you're going to make an exception that's based on that one individual, or if you're going to change a policy or a practice more broadly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have to have a certain level of astuteness there, I suppose, whether you go out and formally survey people, or is these conversations, but I suppose how can we notice these things happening in the company? Because sometimes they're simmering, I guess, beneath the surface, and you don't know. Clearly, you're quite proactive. You saw something, responded, rather than reacting when it's too late. Even if you knew it too late, because a lot of times, I guess, businesses could get themselves into a pickle if they, people are burning out, stressing out. They don't have these wellness days, if people don't even care to look for the data. But what can people in HR, or even not in HR, in the company themselves? We want to thrive in the company. What can they do?
I think this is spot on to ask, and actually, again, in the spirit of particularly neurodiversity, I really believe you have to multi-thread your listening posts. You have to, what I mean by that, you cannot rely on one way of having a one-to-many conversation with your teams. Then, because different people will interact differently with those posts. So some people will be very happy taking an anonymous survey. It'll be an environment that they're really happy in. Other people would much rather ask a question at an all hands in front of everybody. For the next person along the line, that might terrify them. They might rather sit down privately with their manager and have a conversation. Others might prefer a focus group because actually they're worried about, they need that inspiration of hearing or seeing what others are saying in a focus group or a roundtable discussion. And so those components, when you're doing any kind of ideas generation, data gathering, I think is really important. Some people want to write, they want to write in anonymously. Sometimes it can be reactive, sometimes it can be proactive. So if you are trying to get a handle on how your team is doing, what kind of support they need, asking yourself throughout, say, whatever your cycle is, for us, we might look at a quarter. We'd say, throughout this quarter, what listening posts do we have in place? And how are those listening posts appealing to different people, different types, different personas? So we have a survey, we have a town hall with our CEO. That might be really terrifying for others. So we have a more informal local town hall in a smaller group. We'll have at least one leadership visit who will do a functional level gathering just with their team. We have a managers forum where all the managers are around the table sharing challenges that they're facing in a confidential setting. We have one-to-ones with managers between HR, every manager once every couple of weeks, to then look proactively at each member of their team and how they're doing, what support they might need. And then finally, and this I love, is doing a random and proactive outreach. So Alex, before we went live, you and I were talking about what I've been up to, and I said I've been getting some more resource for my team. And one of the things I will do when my team is fully, is all roles filled in the next couple of months, is bring back my sort of random Friday reach outs. Now the caveat here is that it can terrify people when HR randomly reaches out. So I would strongly recommend explaining again what the program is, what they can expect, why you are randomly reaching out to them. But literally using like a free internet randomizer, chucking in names that are in your site and seeing, okay, actually, I know that person really well. I meet with them regularly again. And then saying, yeah, great. I haven't spoken to this person for a while. And then just checking in and saying, tell me, like, how is your experience? Tell me the high points, tell me the challenges. And that's the other thing, the questions that you ask. I tend to ask that question. How's the last month been? What have your highlights been? What have your challenges been? And allowing the conversation a bit of time, because there's a pattern to these conversations. They start with somebody saying, oh, it's great. I mean, it's great. I love it here. Yeah, nothing really to complain. It's all really good, but I suppose there is this one thing, maybe I could, and there's a point in the conversation, and that one thing might be a great improvement suggestion, or it might be turning over a stone that needed to be overturned because something is maybe not going on there that is as favorable as we would like. And so those all the way up from that one-to-one sort of random listening posts, random check-ins, up to the different levels of interacting and engaging, I think are really what it's all about in terms of understanding if we really are looking out for our people as in a way that we should.
Yeah, and there's these different places where people can listen, where you can, I guess, gather insights, information. People may not be vulnerable off the bat. In fact, why would they be? It takes time. But of course, there's other sources as well. There's a lot of, groups and communities that can be formed. And whether it's like, it could be groups of parents, for example. I think you already mentioned that in the conversation. I remember at Bob, then we had I think it was like Black at Bob group at Meta. There were so many groups. There was a group for people with depression, one for ADHD. And they used Workplace, which is kind of like an internal Facebook in Facebook for these like private groups. I believe there may have even been one for people, suffering from who had suffered from alcoholism in the past. And we're in 12-step communities. There may have even been one for any or all sorts of neurodivergence. People can, maybe go to these groups, have discussions amongst themselves, and then they can go through the relevant channels where they may be.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much value in those resource groups, and actually, HR's role in those resource groups is different to perhaps other more facilitated sessions. I think our role is to create the program. It's to put the boxes on the shelf so people can go and take the boxes off the shelf. This is how you create a resource group from scratch. This is how you can go about getting an exec sponsor. This is the kind of budget that will be available to you. This is the company funding that will be available, the company resource rather. We really encourage you to go ahead and do this. But that kind of the best efforts can be launched. I mean, what I think's worked really effectively in a grassroots situation where you don't have any resource groups is taking the effort to build the program of how to create a resource group and identifying your trailblazing group, but still with that trailblazing group, doing it the way it's meant to, because the temptation is to go and set that group up.
Okay.
But then you haven't tested the ability to create the group. You haven't tested if your instructions and your kind of off-the-shelf package works. You've just gone and done it. So rather you go to somebody and you say, you know what, I've heard you say 3 or 4 times that you'd really love there to be a Black at Bob group or a parents group or a LGBTQ plus group. You know what? How do you feel about taking that bold step? We'll support you in the background, but you could drive this. And again, it comes back to that idea, right, of what we were saying at the start of the conversation, of celebrating these differences. You're moving the needle entirely from kind of, I had to come out at work several times in the past as a gay man, and I did have that fear. So whilst I can't necessarily relate to every component of a neurodivergent spectrum, I do know what that feeling is like of when am I going to have this conversation with them? I'm frightened about this. And it's very different if you can celebrate that platform from the start, so that somebody who puts their hand up and says, oh, I'll be the trailblazer that sets up the resource group for that. Then they're celebrated. Then they get access to people. Then they get access to resource. What a great way of viewing it, rather than kind of, oh, if you've got something difficult you need to tell me about, which is automatically feels like a heavy and negative conversation.
Yeah. And I suppose, like you've touched upon there, with the celebrating differences, because people are different. And maybe that's one of the reasons why the language has shifted from equality to equity, because I suppose equality implies that we are all the same, we're all equal. But the truth of the matter is we are different, different folks, different strokes, or whatever you want to call it. And being someone who's neurodivergent myself, then there are certain challenges, and we all have different lived experiences in life. Whilst I can emphasize with, or I can have empathy rather for someone else, I don't know what that is like. I've never lived life in their shoes with all of the challenge and everything that they've gone through. And basically, there's a stigma, I suppose, about coming out when you have anything that could be invisible. For me, that is the mental health aspects. You've had your own challenges with that too. Yeah. So yes, how can we allow for the difficult conversations to occur? But people can be frightened,
They can, and then again, you referenced at the start this idea of trust, and if the trust is there, ideally you build the trust that without a trigger of something that's happened to have to build it, because that's a very stressful experience for the individual. So what I mean by that is if you can build the trust from the outset, and then let's say something that individual does experience something very difficult, then they know that the trust is there. So back to the kind of example we used before, but I was delighted to hear in the parents roundtable that we did recently that they all felt very quickly in their journey here that this was a parent-friendly organization, which meant that when 2 weeks in, their child was sick and the nursery wouldn't accept them and said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to stay at home, they weren't freaking out about it. And they weren't, they were able to say to their manager with confidence, I'm not going to be able to come in today. I'm probably going to be a bit disrupted. Little so-and-so is going to be at home with me because the nursery won't have them. You don't want them to find out that it's okay when they put their first request in. It's too late. They've already been through a stress. They're already apologizing. They're already apologizing for something about themselves, which they shouldn't have to apologize about. And I don't think we've solved that one by any means, but that for me is a North Star place to get to, is that you build the trust about the difference before the trust is needed. That's the bar we should aspire to.
Yeah, pretty much. And the people who are in stressful situations, no matter what the situation is, do you really want to add pressure to that? If people are your most valuable resource, put more pressure on them in whatever way. And I don't think anyone tries to do that consciously. I do remember one time, this was at another organization, and I just had a huge migraine headache. I won't go into the detail now, but I remember it was actually I was managing a team of a couple of people. One of them, I asked her if she could take me. She offered to take me home. She did. I called my manager and I just said to her, I just can't continue the work today. And she was so frantic. She was like, Alex, we have all this stuff for you to do and this and that. There's a plan for the rest of the year. And just like, I hung up the phone. I just couldn't deal with it. Can't deal with that stress because, and that is a touchy subject. I suppose another touchy subject, and this may be a comment on the back end that didn't come through. It says over here, what if like someone does, it doesn't come to HR, but HR is informed that there may be an employee who is neurodivergent. How does that get addressed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, we do experience this, and we experience it for a great reason, which is that you build when there is a strength of culture there, your team are looking out for themselves without needing to have HR there. And so I'd say this is relatively common. People come to you and they say, I am aware of, or I am worried about. I guess it very much depends on the tone in which they're coming to you in terms of how you address it. So if someone is coming to you flagging a concern because someone is neurodivergent, then that needs to be handled in a very different way, as in a concern for themselves. They're saying, oh, I'm worried because that person's a bit, this for me then becomes an education point, and this is the line and you've crossed it point. I don't think that's probably the spirit of the question, but it's important to clarify. I interpreted this question as coming more from a point of concern and care from the employee that says, I've noticed that somebody maybe is struggling and I wonder if they may be a neurodivergent in some way. And that is definitely harder because you don't want to, there's two things there. I'm going to give that really annoying answer that gets addressed case by case, because I've experienced it where somebody flagged a serious concern with an individual and we could not ignore that serious concern. So we went and spent a bit of time directly with that individual. We didn't tell them that their attention had been brought to us by somebody else. We just said, you know what, we'd love to catch up. We've noticed a few things ourselves and we'd love to see how we can help. If the individual comes to you and there's not an immediate concern, but they're saying, look, I think I'm working with somebody who maybe is neurodivergent, what do I do? There's such a great opportunity to create awareness and trust and dialogue without HR having to intervene. I think sometimes we can put the hero's cape on too quickly. This could be in lots of different things. It could be even when a manager is dealing with a challenge with an employee, I'll go and speak to them for you then, which isn't always the right answer. It's let's role play how you're going to go and speak to them, because it's what you want as an organization is this web of great connections and strong trusted connections. I think this links to Dave Logan's work on tribal leadership, is like analyzing how different groups are connecting within the organization. And so if it was somebody coming and saying, I've noticed this, or I'm a little bit concerned about this, I think a really great response to that is, well, that's great. There's kind of differences here and there's a place here for neurodiversity. Do you need some help in how you build that connection? You work with them. What can we do about it? How can we help you? And not rush to intervene. So those are my three thoughts on that one. To summarize, if the person is concerned and there's a slightly negative taste of that, then I think we set a tone and draw a line around why that's not acceptable and why that neurodivergent person is welcome. The second one, if they are a little bit sort of curious or concerned about how they can work well with them, is to not to intervene, but to empower them to go and build a great relationship. And that might not be a one and done conversation. And then the third one, if they are highlighting a genuine concern, then, as an employer, you have a duty of care. And let's bring it back. I find this so helpful thinking about the physical versus mental health comparison. If they came to you and they said, I've just seen so-and-so and they've collapsed in the corridor, then you wouldn't say, oh, I better leave them there because I don't want to sort of draw undue attention to it. So if they are essentially coming to you and saying, this person, I'm worried that there's something happening on their neurodivergence that is serious, then you need to treat that with the same degree of seriousness as you would with a physical health challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, those three things summarized basically, like educate, empower, and care would be the third one.
Very nice.
Yeah, I suppose it's that tone of going about it, and this kind of links into something else I was thinking as you were saying that, around where the strategy and culture may be interplay. HiBob is an HR tech company. It basically has HR built into it from the ground up. Some other companies may not think about this, and then who knows, 10 years down the line or however long, they may think to themselves, oh, we now have to address these concerns. They haven't thought about it before. And I have seen some companies actually do things like, oh, let's stick a diversity and inclusion workshop in here, kind of like a plasterboard method, something that actually then rattles a lot of people, because it's of a few reasons. One, it's a bit disingenuous, and then two, a lot of employees are then taking out of their workday to attend something, and then they're thinking, well, why am I here when the company didn't care before? What must have happened for this to have occurred? So I guess, like, how can companies really build this into the core? You know, thinking back to all those things that we said before, the things about like the trust, the care, the empowerment, the education, all of these things we were just speaking about.
I'm a big fan of lifting the lid on the methodology.
Mm-hmm.
And we're sort of forced to do it here in a good way, because our teams are speaking to prospects who are HR directors or VPs of HR or CHROs. They're speaking to customers who are in that category, and all of the other teams in the business as well. The product team, the R&D team are researching and designing a product to be used by this. So they want to lift the lid on the methodology. And I think it's very powerful. I think rather than putting that workshop in without any context, this is where the cynicism comes from. If the workshop was your solution, so, but whatever action you're taking, actually explaining the why behind it, starting with the why, is really great, because people like that. They see it as we have a value around interacting with transparency and openness, and they see that as part of the transparency. You get more buy-in from it. So, and in general, it helps you with difficult conversations if you take people on that journey a little bit. The other thing I think is being very careful about mandating stuff. There's a balance. So as an organization, you need to work out what your baseline is, this is the lowest level of what we will accept in terms of respect, interaction. That can be mandated without apology. So, we at HiBob, we do an in-person fairness at work training for everybody once a year. It's not regulated. In some countries, it's a compliance step. It's not actually a compliance step in the UK. To have to do that kind of fairness at work training. You need an anti-discrimination policy or something in your handbook. You don't have to train people on it. We do, but we explain why. So rather than just saying, sorry folks, you need to show up to this training, we say, look, we are an HR business. Our bar has to be high, and therefore this is mandatory. We'll see you there. Mm-hmm. And even just that little bit of an explanation around it. On our LMS, our learning management platform, one of the first modules that we uploaded was an unconscious bias training, broken into multiple modules. That is not mandated, because we know that there is research around that. And if you mandate it, then people go in a little bit as you were just role playing there, Alex, and they're like, why am I doing this? I don't need to be here. I haven't got this problem. I'm fine. And, their ears are closed from the outset. So understanding what your lowest bar is, and then your future aspiration of where you want to get to, and encouraging and incentivizing people to get there without forcing it, creates more sustainable roots in this kind of cultural change. I think it comes down to having a little bit of patience. You won't solve, if you have a problem to do with inclusivity or equity when it comes to neurodivergence, or if you, as a company, you've noticed that people that might have suffered with mental health have not been willing and capable to speak out because of the environment you've created, you're not going to solve that through one training. That's going to take time. So there's a final piece there is around how you manage your stakeholders internally as an HR leader. Very often we work with other senior leaders who can be very logic driven in their approach. When I worked at my startup scale up, the CEO, because he would come to me and say, we have this people related problem, what's the solution? And he's a brilliant mind in kind of mathematics and logic and macroeconomics, and you can ask him a question and say, we have a problem in this space, what's the solution? And it took me a while to get confident to say to him, I don't know yet. You need to let me spin this around a little bit. I need to think there isn't going to be a solution. There are going to be paths that we can take. And then the second lesson I learned, because I got stung by this, was the fact it can't be a one and done. If it's a cultural shift or a new culture that you want to instill, you've got to give yourself time to do it and say, this is a journey. It's going to be iterative. We'll bring everybody with us in round one.
100%. And that one and done, or as I sometimes call it, the set and forget, just doesn't work. But those 3 words probably the three most powerful words on the planet, I don't know, actually inspires a lot of confidence. People who think they know, but don't. That's where problems arise. But there's one thing that you know really well, and it's maybe the final point that we end on, and that's resilience. I'm going to share something that you posted on LinkedIn recently over here about emotional resilience in the workplace. Touched upon that, we were talking earlier about bringing, their whole self to work. And these 5 areas that you were speaking about, how can we manage our interactions in a way that preserves the emotional well-being of our people? And you said, start with the heart, as empathy, create safe spaces, as we discussed already, resilience training, listen up, and keep an eye on the pulse. Actually, as I've read through this now, I realized we kind of discussed all of these to some extent today.
One thing that just jumps to mind, Alex, is that when, as an HR leader of a and I know that there are vast organizations out there, we're not a vast organization, but we are big enough to not be able to have the capacity to have one-to-one conversations with every employee. Like we just have that, in a week or a month. But your employees talk to one another, and they will share more than we are able to share. So if you can have those meaningful one-to-ones that start with the heart piece, might only be to do with one person in that moment, but they might tell somebody else, who might tell somebody else, who might say, you know what, I heard that they're really looking out for us here. And then all that thing we were talking about earlier around, you want to build the trust before you need the trust. Mm-hmm. It's that, then for that, maybe there's 3 people removed who weren't involved in that one-to-one, but they heard about it, but not from HR. We never breached the confidence there because the person involved happened to share a couple of confidences. And then 6 months later, one of those people that heard it was aware that support was on offer. Then they know that they can turn to it. And I'm a big believer in that. Positive. If you behave really well with one employee behind a closed door, then that's enough. And it doesn't matter if nobody else sees it there and then, because somehow that good behavior will come back around. Mm-hmm. You've no doubt that if you do something dreadful as an employer with an employee behind a closed door, you're probably going to hear about it. But I think and rightly so, I think we fear that if we do the good, who sees it? What's the point? It's not scalable. It's not scalable. That we hear that a lot. It's not scalable. I kind of disagree with that. I think really ethical, excellent behavior by an HR team for somebody in need does scale, because eventually it comes back.
Yeah, it will always come back, and sometimes in the way that you don't expect it. Love what you just said there, this phrase like build the trust before you need the trust, which is a fantastic way to end things. This is really flown by. We've got like 2 minutes left, I believe. Is there anything else that you want to, share? Any final thoughts from your end, Toby, about what we can do, whether that's HR leaders or anyone watching us who maybe is feeling that they can now reach out to HR support? Maybe they do want more of a helping hand or anything compassionate. Anything else that you have to share?
I would say really really have a think about. Your ally in the business doesn't need to be your HR person. Hopefully they could be, and that's my aspiration, is always that it could be. But I also, the world I want to build in companies is one where everybody feels like they've got someone they can go to. And actually, if that somebody is their manager or their friend or their colleague next to them, that's also okay. So, but ask yourselves in your organization, have you got that person that you can turn to? It doesn't have to be HR, but then there should be somebody there. We spend a lot of time at work. And actually, the last thing I wanted to say was to you, Alex, to celebrate you for giving the airtime for this topic. You brought this as one that you wanted to cover. You have mentioned on the call your own neurodivergence and your own experience. And that's way more powerful than having somebody like me in HR talk about it. And it's brave, and that deserves celebration. So thank you to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Toby. Yeah, and thank you for showing up and also celebrating this topic. That was an important one. It means a lot from my heart. I'm grateful that more people are speaking out about it, because it's only in conversations like this one that other people can have conversations with themselves and their companies. And from there, that's where change can begin. So let's start something. Thank you very much, Toby. And for everyone else watching this, see you on a live probably next year. Unless you're a CRO, and you may be showing up for the event next week. Take care.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.
Bye.